We're black rebels, searching for freedom, trying to break these chains from my mind, trying to find the king that lies inside.
So, episode 8 of the sit down, and to be completely transparent, we already tried to shoot this episode, but I screwed up and didn't put the phone in D&D, so I lost a huge chunk of the first time we have a conversation, or had the conversation. So if anything seems like super brief or something like that, that's probably why. But this is Dr. Kevin Eanes. He's a friend of mine, and you know, when I say that he's a friend, how long have we actually known each other? For definitely more than 10 years.
About 15 years?
About 15 years. Mm-hmm. And we are friends by way of our wives. So my wife is very, very close friends with his wife, and they just go back years and years. And the reason I'm saying all of that is to make the point that this is someone that I trust, someone that I would leave my kids with, and he's not some doctor who's just doing it for the sake of making a whole lot of money and all those kinds of reasons. He's just a hardworking guy who, you know, grew up in a very normal way, just worked hard and went into medicine because he enjoyed it. And we're going to talk about that later. But from my end, the main thing, because I thought about our conversation, that I really want to try to convey with this specific podcast is the idea that, number one, COVID is clearly still here.
Still here.
Right? And it's probably going to ramp back up. Mm-hmm. And, you know, everyone wants to enjoy their holiday season. Like, I'd like to be able to enjoy my Thanksgiving and Christmas as much as possible, but still maintain basic safety and not have the holidays ruined by some insane spike like we saw kind of in New York. Mm-hmm. So, you know, all that having said all that, can you please just specify, you know, what you do and where you do it?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, like Jay said, I'm an ER doc. I've lived and worked here in Delaware my whole career. I spent my first 3 years working at Wilmington Hospital and Christiana Hospital. Mm-hmm. And now I've been at BB for the past 10 years down in Lewis, Delaware. I'm in the ER. I'm the guy you see, whether you just crashed your car, whether you got appendicitis, you got a funky rash, you're having your heart attack or your stroke. I'm the first face you meet when you walk into a hospital.
Cool. And I also want to say, like, you know, and this is just a thank you, honestly. Like, he spent a lot of time working in Wilmington, and he's literally saved, you know, I talk a lot about our boys and the kids from the city. He's literally saved some of them. So this is another reason why I just, like, he's doing this from a different place. And so if you hear something that makes you say, oh, that's a conspiracy, or, you know, all of these random things that, you know, we'll try to hit on, he's not that dude. Like, there's no other motive outside of just saving your tail. You know what I mean? So, COVID. One of the main things that I keep hearing is, oh, it's just another flu. All right. So as much as you can you please, you know, dispel that idea? You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, I mean, the only thing that the flu and COVID have in common is that they're both viruses. They're both spread through saliva and snot. Mm-hmm. But that's about where the similarities end. Mm-hmm. I mean, the big difference is how lethal COVID is and how contagious it is. So mm-hmm. the tricky thing about COVID is that on average, every one person with COVID infects at least 4 of the people around them. And the odds of you dying if you get COVID are a lot higher than for a seasonal flu.
Mm-hmm. Now, 2 pieces of that. So it's easier to catch.
It's easier to catch.
Is that because, like, why is that? Is it just because of how it spreads?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the nature of the virus. I don't honestly know why mm-hmm. It spreads like wildfire. I don't mm-hmm. know structurally the difference between the 2 viruses, why it's easier to spread. I just know that if you got the flu and if you have COVID, you're much more likely to infect someone with COVID than the flu.
Mm-hmm. And is part of the, I don't know what the actual term is, but is part of the sort of death rate of it, is that, is a lot of that because it is a novel virus, or just because of how it functions?
Sure. So all of us at some point have been exposed to other coronaviruses. And in fact, one of the most common causes of the common cold is some form of a coronavirus. Mm-hmm. But what makes COVID specifically different is that our bodies just haven't seen anything like this virus before. And so when your body gets exposed to a virus that it's never seen before, your immune system revs up a lot more. There's a lot more inflammation in your body than with viruses that you've seen in the past.
Now, again, when you see the COVID patient, like I think everyone at this point probably has read something about what the symptoms are and what happens. But like from your end in the ER, like number one, is it like, that's a COVID person? Like, can you recognize it pretty quickly, or like how do you what comes along with it? Like,
Sure.
what do you expect?
So I mean, the thing that, usually if you're meeting me in the ER, it's usually because you've either had a fever for days and you just ache from head to toe, or you just can't breathe. And those are the two main reasons why people come in. In the summer and in the spring, it was easy to spot a COVID patient because it's not normal in the summer for an otherwise healthy person to have a fever of 103 and to be coughing and not able to breathe and lose their sense of smell. That just doesn't. You don't see that on a random June day. As we get into the fall and the winter, it's going to get a lot harder because that's the time of year where we do see flu and something called RSV, which infects kids a lot.
I never heard of that.
And so all of a sudden, we're going to be seeing lots more people with fever, cough, sore throat, muscle ache. And we're going to have to try to discern which ones have COVID and which ones don't.
So, okay, with flu and COVID, as I'm actually bringing them together, is part of why we have a flu season for the same reason that we're going to see a spike in COVID? You know what I'm saying? Like, is the flu always there, but it just ramps up in the winter because we're closer together and,
Yeah, so in the summer months, we were talking earlier about eating outdoors in Wilmington. So in the summer, you can space yourself out. You can be in the fresh air. But in February, when it's 20 degrees and it's dark and gray for the 15th day in a row and you're crammed in your house, and you're breathing on everyone, that's when those germs spread more. So I think
it's not like the flu grows in that time of year like a tree, or like, it's not like, blueberry season. It's just because it's always there.
Correct. It's just going around the world. So in the fall and winter months, it's up here, and in our summer, when it's winter and the southern hemisphere, that's when they have their big spike.
Okay.
It's just swimming around.
I did not know that. Now, what about the fact, and I've heard this, so I don't want to say what about the fact, what about the idea, that I've heard that, like, COVID droplets die in the sunlight. You know what I'm saying? Have you seen that, or is there any truth to that? Or?
Well, it is true that all viruses eventually, without a host, die.
Sure.
They basically, any virus is just hijacking your cells to live in and reproduce. And so whether it's the flu or COVID, if you spray a bunch of that on this fence, eventually it's going to die. The problem is it's not, UV light's not a magic cure-all. It's not like it suddenly gets hit with light and just dies.
Because see, I didn't really understand that. Like, I thought that, if we're sitting across from each other like we are now in direct sunlight, and I was like, and I sneezed, like, and they would float across. But it's not like, they could still get across.
It's not like a vampire.
It's not a vampire. But it came from a bat. Go ahead.
So someone much smarter than me could probably tell you how many minutes or hours it takes for COVID versus flu versus other viruses to die. I'm not that smart guy, though.
Well, the virus doesn't just get destroyed immediately.
It doesn't just
Yeah.
vaporize upon getting touched by sunlight.
Okay.
And so, yes, the cases are lower in the summer, but it's not because there's more sunlight. It's because of what we're doing and where we are.
So the idea that it was safer to be at the beach had nothing to do with the sunlight. It's just because ideally you're further apart.
Just further apart, and the breeze is blowing it somewhere other than in your face.
I gotta tell you, I'm an idiot, because in as much as I didn't want to be close to anybody at the beach, I'm basically in my brain like, I'm in the beach, all the things are getting zapped, so no concern. But you still gotta exercise the same general precautions as if it was cold outside.
Of course.
Okay, but then at least being outside is better because more things flow.
Yeah, there's just more wind when you're doing activities outdoors, whether it's walking on the beach or playing football with your kids. You're not face to face with people like you are in a movie theater or on an airplane.
But it really I wonder now how much people are sort of underestimating how much, sort of danger they're putting themselves even by just eating outside.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Interesting. I mean, my brother's going to see this and go crazy. Like, I'm never going in. He's going to stay inside the house for the rest of his life. So I'm going to delete this part. No, that's funny, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
See, this is why I'm glad we actually are doing it again. So, perfect point to kind of just explain the basics of a virus to everyone, okay? So, for everyone, who thinks that there's any sort of fake news, junk science, or masks don't work, again, this is just fundamental science that he's going to explain to you. Gravity does this. It pulls you down. Okay, so how does a virus work? Please.
Sure. So viruses need you, or they need someone. So a virus has one job in life: to make more copies of itself. And there's just one problem: it can't do it alone. It needs some living thing to reproduce itself in. So on the most basic level, a virus is an organism that gets in your cells. In the case of COVID, it's from saliva or snot. It's some droplet, some little piece of you gets in my respiratory system. And then once it's in me, it injects itself into the cells in my body and just starts cranking out millions of copies of itself.
So with COVID droplets, I know that's kind of a catch-all term?
Yeah, it's a respiratory droplet. So some moisture from your body. So
sweat?
I don't know if it's in sweat, but it's definitely in mucus and saliva. There have been some studies out there that it was in other bodily fluids. So it's been in semen. You had a thing on Facebook months ago about it being in farts. So
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's legit.
Yeah, that's legit.
Well, what about just the normal air you breathe out? Just the air, as long as I don't cough or, you know what I mean? If I just...
Well, every time you exhale, there's a lot of moisture in the air that we're exhaling. Part of your respiratory system, the whole purpose of your nasal passageways is to warm and moisten the air before it hits your lungs. So you're exhaling a lot of water vapor that you can't see, but we're breathing out droplets right now.
Right. So I'm thinking about myself again right now, but one thing that I haven't done that I've really wanted to do, Coach, is my Muay Thai training, and he's been like, "What are you doing?" He's been kind of breaking my balls in a fun way, but even if we're outside and we're training, we're hitting pads and breathing hard, there's no way that we're not exchanging.
Of course. Perfect example. So you ever, with your kids in the wintertime, you go outside and walk on a cold winter day, and your kids get have fun, like blowing smoke. You can see the steam. So all it is the water vapor in their breath flying all over the place. You're doing it in the summer too. You just can't see it because the air's not cold.
Right. No, this is still, I probably should have already thought about this, but I really didn't. I'm kind of glad that, I haven't been training as much as I want to. You know what I mean? So, okay, have you, no, because you're in the ER, but the idea of these asymptomatic patients who have the virus, but, aren't showing any symptoms. That could very well again be the case.
Of course, yeah, and that's my concern with schools opening, is that kids, thank God, for the most part, have not been the ones that are getting really sick.
Right.
But kids are great at sharing their germs with their parents and their grandparents and the lunch lady and the school bus driver. And if 40-50% of kids are asymptomatic, and each of them infects 4 people.
Is it that high?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, basics again. How do we prevent these things from spreading?
Sure. So the good news is it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be that hard. It really can be just as simple as doing everything you can to not get your respiratory droplets on other people and not having other people get their respiratory droplets on you. And that really boils down to wearing a mask, washing your hands, and if there are times when you can minimize being in closed quarters with people, do it.
So if we had a school, right, where all of the young people were compliant with wearing their masks the proper way and washing their hands, would that in your brain, I know this you're not supposed to be like making policy, but like, would that be really, really helpful, or like you still think there's going to be problems with that?
Well, no, I mean, if every human being in a school wore a mask the entire time they were in the building, and they spaced kids out so they were 6 feet apart, and they minimized the common areas where 12 people are touching a doorknob or 16 people are touching an iPad screen,
Right.
And there's plenty of soap and water and hand sanitizer, there are ways to make school safer.
But what is the 6 feet thing? Why does 6 feet matter?
That's just how far your respiratory droplets are getting sprayed around.
Right. I wonder, because we talked about this, like, I'm a singer, obviously, and it's still shocking to me that something that's so just kind of almost mundane as singing has become like, not a target, but like a real problem in terms of spreading the virus. And I would like to see a study to know how much further I'm shooting my death droplets when I'm singing versus just talking or just breathing. You know what I mean?
I imagine a singer with professional training,
like a real opera singer.
Yeah, I mean you're probably hitting the back wall.
Yeah. That's crazy, man. Though, so but again, it's just these masks. The masks really matter, guys. Like, and isn't kind of the point? And I think we said this too. Is that listen? I am someone who literally, like, the primary way that I make money was completely chopped out from under me. Like, I can't still really perform, and I can totally sympathize with the small business people who have lost, their ability to work, and it's coming back now. But I get that frustration. But like, is it pretty safe to say that if everyone would just comply with this sort of simple, fundamental idea of just covering your face, that we could function relatively normally?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
there wouldn't be 0 cases.
Right.
But if everyone just wore a mask, there would have been a lot fewer cases. And you see it time and time again in different parts of the country where there's these big spikes.
Well, what is the real... I'm trying to think what the real arguments are. So I've heard certainly that it's like it's taking my freedom. And quite frankly, like, I don't want to push buttons right now, but it's just like, really? Like, it's just like... And I am someone who naturally rejects any kind of conformity. I don't trust the government, blah, 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 blah. But at a certain point, like, I was like, okay, I'm going to be reasonable here. I put on my mask. Like, the first 2 days, it was kind of a pain in the behind. And then I was like, okay, this is not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, this is just not a big deal. You know what I mean? So I don't have too much sympathy for anyone complaining about losing their freedom.
Yeah.
But the idea that they don't work, I have seen that. Like, what can, like, I don't know. Do you have to show them some kind of a diagram? Like,
yeah, I mean,
like, how can you say it doesn't work? What's the argument to say that it doesn't?
I would just ask those people, have you ever worn a condom, buckled a seatbelt, put a helmet on your head? There are people that die in a car accident with a seatbelt buckled.
Right.
But there's a whole lot more people whose lives were saved by clicking that buckle before they started the car. So nothing's perfect, but if something's 99% effective, I'll take my odds.
And again, how much does the kind of material, how much does that matter? Like, we don't all have to have the N95s. Like, is something as simple as a silk scarf
that makes cloth mask, or these disposable paper masks? You can get 50 of them for $7. You don't need those N95 masks or a respirator unless you're in a medical setting where you are aerosolizing those droplets. So if you are, for instance, when I'm putting people on a ventilator and I've got my face in their mouth and I'm shoving a breathing tube down their vocal cords, I wear an N95 mask for that.
Why do you wear it? Because what's the difference?
So when I hook that person up to that ventilator and I put that tube down, I hook a bag up to start breathing for them. And when that exhaled air gets released, it's now those big droplets are getting turned into much tinier aerosolized droplets. And those tiny droplets that are getting released from the ventilator are smaller than the filter of those paper masks. And so an N95 is just a tighter material. It filters out more organisms, more molecules. But if I'm just going to a grocery store, or talking to a patient who's there with a broken ankle, I don't need some fancy mask. I can get a 3-cent mask and still feel safe.
So, okay, and this is another sort of case in point. You're the perfect one. Over the course, I mean, as much as you can guess, over the course of, since this whole thing started, how many COVID patients do you think you've seen since this started?
I would guess, if you count both the really sick ones and the not so sick ones who were just there because their boss told them they need a test, I've probably seen about 50 COVID patients this year.
And did you catch COVID?
No. No.
Why didn't you catch COVID?
Because I wore a mask. I washed my hands. I used all the normal PPE. I was in a gown. I did all the responsible things that you could do, or our wives could do, or our kids can do.
Right.
There was no magic bullet.
But, and so, and I've been thinking about this more and more because, I guess because of the season that we're kind of going into, just as I thought about the podcast, but it's just a fact. It's just a fact, right? That if it, bottom line is 200,000 people have died in this country because of COVID. So if there was no COVID, you can put 200,000 people back here.
That's right.
Now, we can't say, if we would have all undergone these precautions, from February till now and really been tight about it, how many people would have been saved. But it's just, the more I really think about it, it's like, people are like, well, this many people die from diabetes, this many people die from that, and what about those? And it's like, no one's saying that those don't matter, but it's like we can prevent 200, like I don't, it's just like I'm really actually thinking about this more than I have previously. I've just kind of been going through the motions, but it's like, I don't want to drag you into anything, but these deaths were prevented, and why not prevent them? I mean, in your doc,
especially something when the prevention was cheap, effective.
Yes.
And preventing those deaths means that our lives could have been more normal.
Right.
If
it's like just following. That's the thing. It's like all we had to do is, and everything. Hindsight is 20/20. Blah, blah, blah. But we did know. Like all you had, put on your mask, stay away from each other, follow these, wash your hands, and number one, we would have saved lives, and we could have gotten back to normalcy a lot faster, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I just feel like so much of this stuff isn't debatable, so I don't understand why we're even debating it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it really quickly, when you think about it, we quickly move into flat earth territory.
Yeah.
Like, bro, like, what are we talking about here? Why am I arguing? So what do? I don't know why we're so different. And I'll leave it at that. So, we talked about, I wanted to make sure we talk about sort of predictions, I guess, if you will.
Sure.
When we had our discussion previously, it was pretty much, you were saying that the vaccine is pretty much the way out of this at the end of the day.
I mean,
right?
This COVID's not going anywhere until all of us, or at least 70-80% of us, in one way or another, are immune.
Right.
And the only way we're really going to get to this herd immunity that politicians keep talking about is with a vaccine.
And what the vaccine will allow us to do is reach herd immunity without having to have people die.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the people that say, well, herd immunity we can do it the old-fashioned way, there's not really a whole lot of list of success stories of viruses that disappeared because we all just got it and some of us died. I mean, if you look at some of the biggest success stories in medicine in the past 100 years, getting rid of things like smallpox and almost getting rid of measles, those things didn't just happen by chance. That was science and governments getting organized to immunize their citizens.
Right. And we're not going to go off the deep end with this one either, but as much as you can, and just with basic understanding, how do vaccines work? I don't need you to explain why you're not going to get autism from a vaccine, but like, again, from a very just normal, smart guy with no agenda. Like the farmer, he's not sponsored by Pfizer. You understand? Like he's just telling you basic science that really you can't dispute at this point. Like there is a thing called gravity. Light moves this fast. And vaccines work how?
So thank God our body has this amazing thing called an immune system.
Mm-hmm.
It is working 24/7 to protect you from the things that your body doesn't want in it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that we teach our immune system to look out for infections is with a vaccine. So vaccines come in all shapes and sizes, but in general, they program your immune system to recognize something as dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're talking about the flu vaccine or a measles vaccine or a meningitis vaccine, you are injecting your body with something that makes your immune system say, we got to watch out for this.
Mm-hmm.
And if this thing ever comes back around again, we are going to latch onto it the second we detect it, and we're not going to let this thing spread.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the bouncers of your body.
Ah, I like that. I like that. Right? But it's almost like past that, could you consider it to be like I used to do up, down, left, right, BA start it's like a cheat code, right? Because normally your body wouldn't be able to figure it out, but we have smart people who can, take a cell, I guess, and figure out in a lab how to make the cell respond properly to whatever the virus is. Is that right?
Yes. Now so your immune system doesn't always need someone to hold its hand.
Right,
so people who got COVID and didn't die, their immune system remembers. It is now primed to look out for COVID if it comes back around again.
Right.
Now, it's not 100% effective. There have been studies out there that show 2 to 5% of people who got COVID can get it again.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I have a friend who caught it, and I said,
Yeah.
dude, just go party. And he was like, I don't think I should do that. And he was right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So whether you're getting exposed to COVID the old-fashioned way or because you're getting a vaccine, your immune system is getting that warning. The big difference is that with a vaccine, you don't have to be sick and miserable for 10 to 14 days and risk dying or killing the people you love.
Yeah, but, okay, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
I don't believe this at all. But yeah, they're going to, put something in the vaccine because, the big pharma money. Like, Pfizer has an incentive to make just a bunch of money. They want to make money for their shareholders and all that kind of stuff. So, we're going to rush this vaccine, and people put things in vaccines. I don't know what they put into them, but what kind of nefarious things could you do, to make, okay, perfect example. Have you heard of the Tuskegee experiment?
Yes. Yeah.
So this is where a lot of, the African American community, there will be a certain amount of people, justifiably, who we don't trust government.
Sure.
We don't, we have our ears and eyes are paying a lot of attention to this vaccine because understanding what happened with the Tuskegee experiment and just there is a dark side to every industry.
Yeah.
So should we have a concern about nefarious activities with the creation of this vaccine that's coming about shortly?
I think it is reasonable for any American to be skeptical about the speed with which these are coming out. I think that's a justified concern. But to think that there's some secret something that they're slipping you, that this is really, this is how the zombie apocalypse starts, that's I don't think that you have to worry about. All of these different pharmaceutical companies have tens of thousands of people that have already gotten these vaccines injected in them to look to see if they're safe, to look to see if they're effective. Before I get a vaccine, I would want to actually take a couple minutes and actually look at the safety profile of these things.
What does that mean? What is the safety profile?
So just what percentage of people have side effects, and if so, what are those side effects? And I'd also want to know how safe or how effective these are. So none of these vaccines, and this is true for other vaccines that you've gotten and I've gotten in our lives, none of these vaccines work 100% of the time. And so what I want to know is, are these 95% effective at preventing illness? Are these 50% effective? And the CDC does set a minimum effectiveness that you have to prove in order to get cleared for public use. But I just want to know, how safe is it, and what are the odds that if I get this vaccine, I'm not going to end up in the hospital with COVID?
I have a question, and I'm glad this is a perfect one, and it just jumped in my head right now. In terms of how your immune system works, okay? So this is just a thought. So, all right, you if you work out, you teach your heart. Like if you run, your heart gets stronger and stronger, and you sort of naturally build up its ability to, I guess, process oxygen and get blood and everything that it needs to the rest of your body. Like you work it out, you work it more, and if you don't work out your heart, it gets weak. Is there any parallel to that in your immune system? Like, is there any reason to say, like, if you didn't take the flu vaccine, it's almost like you're giving a crutch to your immune system? Is there any of that, or is it just like could your body figure it out better without help? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's quite the same. I think that probably the better, the equivalent is, if you tell your daughter, don't touch that hot stove, you're going to burn your fingers, and she says, thanks for the heads up, Dad. Or she burns the heck out of her hand. Either way, she's going to end up knowing that stove is dangerous.
Sure, but
one way's a lot safer and a lot less painful. So your immune system, whether you are getting sick with COVID and hopefully surviving, or whether you end up getting one of these COVID vaccines once they are proven to be safe and effective, you end up in the same spot. There's just a lot suffering one way.
Makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Now, everyone, I had other questions, and I have my handy-dandy list here, and I'm going to make sure that I didn't forget any questions as we go on. Actually, I've hit a lot of this stuff already. Okay, no. So, just in terms of Delaware, can you kind of walk me through the sort of wave of what you've seen with COVID, from the beginning? You know what I mean?
So, like we talked about with masks, the way you spread this, or the way you catch this, is usually you are maskless in a very enclosed, confined space.
Yes.
And the three biggest populations that fit that category are old people in nursing homes, people who are either incarcerated or working in a prison, or people that work in meatpacking plants. And those are three groups of people that in the spring...
How random. I mean, it makes sense, but those are three completely... Yeah. It's so funny.
Basically, you get a group of people in an enclosed space. None of them are wearing masks, and they're breathing each other's air. And that's what makes it spread.
Yeah.
And so the first wave that we saw back in the spring was nursing home patients. And shortly after that is when we started seeing prisoners and prison guards and chicken plant workers coming in. And if the problem with COVID, especially once you talk about COVID in the workplace, is that people work because they're trying to support themselves and support their families. Everyone's got bills to pay. And most of us have someone besides ourselves we're looking out for. And if you are working in a chicken plant and you are one paycheck away from your family not being able to eat or have a roof over their head, you're going to pop a bunch of Tylenol and Motrin in the parking lot and mask your fever, and you're going to go work your butt off for 12 hours about this far away from your coworker, who's then going to breathe on 4 other people. And so, there's a lot more. Yes, masks are important, but if there are financial incentives that make people lie about their symptoms, it's going to spread. Yeah, no,
I mean, I'm obviously in a much easier financial situation than someone who's kind of, has no option but to work in a chicken plant. But even myself, I've had to make, certain decisions because I have to work. You know what I mean?
Everyone who's listening to this has gone to work sick.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's going to be one of the things that really, at least for me personally, and we've talked about this, will change, because before, I guess it's because we have a novel virus. It's been a pandemic, but you'd have to do a lot to make me not go to work just because I was sick. And I had no real concept of how much number one, I could be getting someone else sick, and how much, like, because I'm, again, me and my stupid brain, I'm like, my immune system will figure this shit out. So I don't wash I wouldn't wash my hands as much. I'm like, okay, you idiot, just wash your hands.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm with kids all day,
Sure.
like young, the nastiest, raunchiest,
Of course,
10-year-olds.
Those are the
I'll
ones
play
that are
basketball, throw the football, pick them up, throw
Of
them,
course.
sweat, and then bite my fingernails.
There you
You
go.
know what
That's all it takes.
But it's like, no. I think that is something that could change for the better
Yeah.
at the end of the day, for everyone. But my point was, yeah, we're all making these decisions, and I guess it still comes down to just, listen, do what you got to do, but follow these basic precautions,
Yeah.
right? But what can the guy in the chicken plant do? You know what I mean? He can wear a mask, and I guess that will significantly help his situation.
Yeah, so the chicken plants have reopened, and now they are wearing masks, and there's more physical barriers in between workers, and they're more
Right.
spaced out.
Right.
And we're not seeing the caseloads now that we were seeing back in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's still any job where you're dealing with the public in the middle of a pandemic is still more dangerous than a job where you're not dealing with the public.
Right.
But there's things that employees and employers can do
Mm-hmm.
to decrease the risk.
I mean, and that's kind of, as I think about it, the fact that cases you've seen a dramatic drop
Yeah.
since March, April.
Yeah.
And that has to, there's the weather and the time of year, but I mean, a huge amount of that clearly is coming from the fact that even if everyone isn't compliant, even the fact that, just the fact alone that there are still a lot of people who aren't compliant, the ones who are wearing them and trying to follow basic scientific recommendations, that's caused a downturn
Yeah.
in the, right. And then, so it'll start to get cold out. And I should say, from the gate, he's been like pretty spot on with predicting everything. You know what I'm saying? That's another reason why I wanted to have him on, because like 2 weeks out, and I said this on the previous one when I messed up the recording, but like I remember 2 weeks out, I was like, where are we? And you were like, chill, just let's see what happens. And within 2 weeks, 1 week, you were like, like
Shut
hunker down. We don't know what we're dealing with and how contagious it's going to be, blah blah. And you were like, just get what you need to get, keep it in the house, and don't go anywhere. And things shot right up. And I probably texted him once a week because I'm like, I don't show it, but I'm paranoid. And I'm like, every little. If I had, because it was allergy season too,
Yeah.
so every little thing that would bother me, I'm thinking about, like, I'm dying, it's over. But week by week, his cases went down, and we kind of reached a certain floor, and now we're seeing a bit of an uptick.
It's starting to creep back.
And why do you think that is right now? Because right now, people are still outside, you know what I mean?
So I think it just has a lot to do with, think about where we were end of April, early May, in terms of society being locked down. And
Right.
now, businesses are opening back up. Some school districts are doing in-person school. So part of it is we're just closer. We're in more enclosed quarters. And I think part of it's also quarantine fatigue.
Yes.
The people, we're months and months into this. And so people are starting to see their family in person more. People are getting tired of the masks, and so people are just letting their guard down. I think it's just human nature. They just it's going to come back, and we're going to put out a fire, and it's going to go down for a little bit, and then we're going to put out another fire, and it's just going to yo-yo back and forth until there's a vaccine.
That was, I think, the best sort of metaphor that we came up with, and I think it's kind of, it really made more sense to me when we talked about it this way. It was the idea of a fire waiting for the firemen to come. So it's like, I'll state it and you can correct it, but it's like, we see that forest catches on fire, and we don't have the capacity to stop the fire. We have to wait for the vaccine, aka the firemen, to come in and put it out. In the meantime, we can do all of these things to make sure that the fire only spreads so far. We can't stop it. The fire's like Jordan, you know what I'm saying?
right.
But we can contain it. We can contain it to a degree with just following some simple things.
Yeah.
And then when the fireman comes, not only does he have less work to do, but we can then get rid of it.
Yeah. That's we're just treading water. We're just trying to limit the damage until the rescuers get here.
Right. It's just that simple, guys. I don't know how else to say it. Let me make sure I don't have anything else on here that were like really big item questions that I had. But the other thing that I want to make sure that I touched on, because we didn't talk about this in the initial recording, was I really want to spend some time talking about you becoming a doctor. Because when we were talking, I'm a musician. I'm an artist, and for me, obviously, what I do is not a rational decision based on the easiest way to make money. I do it because I have a passion for it, and because I believe that doing something you enjoy and are good at, I think that matters. And I was a little bit shocked to find out that you really have a passion for what you do, and not just as a doctor, but specifically as an ER doctor. So I'm going to back it up because I think it's kind of rare. Maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, how did you start your path into the medical field?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
So mostly dumb luck.
Yeah.
So like most 18-year-olds, I went to college not knowing what I wanted to do with my life.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I liked science.
Yes.
I know I like people, but I didn't really have any dedicated.
Even
plans.
that though, you said you knew you like people.
Yeah.
Like he's obviously a nice guy, but like in terms of like how you view a people person, like he's not always the most outgoing, gregarious, like politician kind of guy, but you do like people.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead, yeah.
So just by random chance, I went to this pre-med interest meeting my first week of undergrad, and it seemed like, okay, these classes seem interesting, the people I'm talking to seem like normal people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else to do with my life, let's give it a shot.
Right.
And month by month, year by year, as I got more in the weeds, I realized this is really what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, in the beginning of med school, I didn't know I wanted to work in an ER. I didn't even really know what emergency medicine was.
Right.
But I was one of those med students that liked a little bit of everything. I liked the first week of surgery. I liked the first time you deliver a baby. I liked the first time you fix someone's broken bone. But I really hated the 100th time you took out someone's appendix or delivered a baby or fixed that broken bone. I knew I needed variety.
Right.
I knew I liked taking care of kids and adults and the elderly. And I knew that I just wanted to constantly be busy. I didn't like downtime. And I can still picture where I was, what I was wearing, who I was talking to, what music was on the radio, the first time I stood in an ER and looked around and like that piece slid in.
Yeah.
And I realized this is it.
That's so cool though, because I don't think that a lot of people associate that kind of a moment with, being a medical or even a scientific kind of person. I mean, we all love and respect doctors, you know what I mean? But it's like, you normally hear that kind of conversation about like, oh, I remember the first time I got on the stage, or I remember the first time I stepped on the wrestling mat, or I remember the first, you know what I mean? Like, it's a cool thing, and I don't know if you appreciate it as much as you should, but it's a really cool thing to see anybody who finds their passion and who's also good at it, and especially I think like in the medical field, because listen, clearly I'm a black guy, and well, not clearly maybe, but I'm really not white, but my hair kind of throws it off, but like from the kids that I work with, like 9 times out of 10. And I work with a very skewed population, but it's always I want to play basketball or rap, and every now and then I'll hear somebody say like engineer, and I don't think that enough people understand, that the sciences can be fun.
Of course.
You know what I mean? And that they are interesting, and everyone should be exploring that path, and I think especially now with all of the ignorance that we're seeing in a lot of different places, like science is like, there's no politics in science. This is how it works. So like, I'd rather function that way and think that way. So that's a really cool thing, man. Like, talk talk more about like your day in the ER. You know what I mean? Like what your day to day looks like, because people don't think maybe they know, but I don't think enough people again understand that it's really a grind.
Yeah.
Like it's a grind.
Yeah.
Right.
So part of the beauty of emergency medicine is that it's just completely unpredictable. The ER is never closed. That means that sometimes I'm working during the day, sometimes I'm working at night, sometimes I'm staring at a wall at 4 in the morning. The best thing I could compare it to is did you ever work a restaurant job in high school or college?
Yeah, I was terrible at it.
So I loved working in a busy restaurant. I loved Friday and Saturday night because I liked just the complete chaos and feeling like I could tame it. And my favorite times in the ER is when I'm just bouncing from room to room, taking care of one patient after the next, trying to put out a bunch of different fires at the same time. And then by the end of that shift, we made it through. That surge of patients has died down. Everyone's been taken care of.
Right.
I just love it.
What's interesting about that is, and not that specifically, but like the difference between what we do, which is there's a lot in between, but like I think that with music and with the arts, there's like a perception that's incorrect, because you walk into chaos, right?
Yeah.
And you might think that I'm walking on stage and it's like chaos, but it's actually very controlled.
Yeah.
I actually have a very, I know what's coming next for sure. Like there's a clear plan. Like there's some place for improvisation if you're a jazz guy, but you know this song is next. You know what you're trying. Like I'm actually trying to control the situation as much as possible. Like I'm trying to get a specific thing out of you. So it's just interesting. I've never thought about what we're talking about, like what I do is actually very controlled, and you wouldn't think about it that way. And again, you were enjoying walking into a relative shit show and making sense out of it. And I wonder, where do you think you get that from? Like, where do you think that stems from?
I don't know. I think you just you either tick that way or you don't. I don't know that you could teach someone to like that.
No.
There are definitely people. There are plenty of doctors I know who hate that. There are plenty of doctors who loathe the thought of even working in an ER for a minute, and that's okay.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to do their job either.
Yeah.
I thank God every day that I stumbled ass backwards into my purpose.
Yeah, but I think even with that, like I know you there are parts of it that you stumbled into, but you still, like on one hand you had an open mind to different things, blah 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 blah, but you still were kind of following your basic sense of I like being around science, and and then you kind of figure it out. But I just don't. I think there are too many people who don't think that way. And like one of the cool things in my brain about being a doctor is it's in as much as you have to clearly be smart and diligent and thorough and whatever else you have to be that I don't even know and think about. It's just like take these classes and do this. Boom, 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 boom. You can just. There's no like clear-cut path to being a musician. You know what I mean? Like you can study and learn, but even the process of learning your craft is not as scientific as what you do. So, I'm an artist, and I hope my kids be doctors because it makes a lot more sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you like anything in life, you got to be passionate about it.
Yes.
I know plenty of doctors who became doctors because that's what their parents told them you should do. Right. And a lot of them are miserable. Yep. And a lot of them wish they had followed whatever dream they had that didn't involve going to med school.
Right. No, I think that's why it's so cool to see you do what you do, because I think we all know miserable doctors. I mean, I worked in dentistry, and I definitely know some miserable dentists. Not my best friend, but it's a thing. You know, it's like you're doing what you want to do just for the sake of paying the bills, which obviously matters. But I don't know. I just feel like within reason that it's still important to follow your passion, which is not something that you would necessarily associate with the medical field. You know what I mean? It's really cool to see, and it's comforting. It's like I want to walk out. If I'm about to die, I would definitely rather be working with someone who is like happy to be there and wants to do a good job versus like fuck. Anyway, and who's also become callous, like, oh well, if he's gonna die, hey, listen, I tried.
One of the coolest parts of my job, it's only happened a handful of times, is sitting down and having a conversation with someone that was dead the last time you saw them.
Oh, shit.
So if you ever get the chance to sit down and shake the hand or hug and talk to someone that you were doing CPR on and
bonkers.
Bringing them back to life, and then 5 years later they come up to you and they give you a hug,
that's amazing.
That can nourish your soul for years. You can walk through a lot of shit shows holding on to that,
dude,
until you get a chance to do that again.
That comment is why we needed to redo this, because that is some heavy shit, dude. I never even thought. I might even rewind that part in the podcast. Like,
I once took care of a kid who wrecked an ATV without a helmet. And when I was working on him in the ER, and I was trying to see how deep the cut in his scalp was, I was holding a piece of his brain in my glove.
Wow.
And a few years later, I got to have a conversation with him about math class in school.
Wow, dude.
That was
How did you get to
cool.
see him later?
So I was at some paramedic, Sussex County EMS. They have this banquet every year where they give out awards to different paramedics, and they pick a different doctor every year to give an award to. And they also bring back patients that these medics have saved and honor them as well.
Gotcha.
And they started talking about this patient that they were going to honor this year. And they started talking about this kid who wrecked an ATV and didn't have a helmet. And I thought, man, that sounds a lot like one of my patients I had a couple of years ago. And they started talking about how after a lot of time in the hospital and rehab, he was finally back at school. And they brought this kid up on the stage, and I thought, that's the guy.
That's amazing.
I've touched his brain.
Dude. That is amazing because from my perspective, and I think most people's perspective, you think about the idea that you're preventing them from dying in the first place, not the idea that someone actually comes in dead and you that's crazy as I say it. That's really cool. Wow, that's dope, dude.
Now you see why I like my job.
Yeah, but no, I don't want that kind of stress. It's like this is what it's like. Okay, so now you see why you love doing your job. Like, I can watch a UFC fight and totally appreciate why that dude is happy that he won the world championship and is making money. But I'm not doing all that to get there. You think I'm going through all that to get... No. I'll sit there and do these scales. Like, no way. That's a whole different sacrifice to not only get there, but like the day-to-day. Like, that's a different thing, dude. That's special for real. Something that just jumped in my brain that I wanted to make sure that I also brought up, because this is another sort of conspiracy that I've heard, is the idea that the government is inflating COVID numbers with the idea, I guess like an example would be, if someone comes in to the ER and they die of, say, a heart attack, but they also had COVID, that they call it a COVID death. Like, as much as you can you sort of talk about how you, I guess, categorize COVID patients? Because there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it really isn't that high, and these numbers are inflated, and it's not what the real situation is.
Sure. So, I mean, any time someone dies in this country, regardless of where, regardless of why, some doctor somewhere has to say what the cause of death was. And so, when people are admitted to the hospital with COVID, and they their oxygen level's so low that their heart stops beating, or they have a stroke because there's no oxygen going to their brain, or their kidneys are shutting down because of their infection. When those people die, it was from COVID. Yes, they died because of their stroke or their heart attack, but it was the reason of their stroke or heart attack related to COVID? If so, that's what they died from.
That makes perfect sense, actually.
Unlike if you had COVID and you walked out of the hospital after receiving your positive test results and you get hit by a truck, your cause of death is not COVID. Your cause of death is you were just hit by a truck.
But I feel like there are people who are literally trying to argue that's how these things are going down. And that's a large part of the point of why I wanted to do this, is because, there's like this... people who don't really work in the medical field, like, they start saying things that there's some conspiracy, and I'm like, I get it, because conspiracy, like, the government and people do bad things, but, like, on the whole, like, there's not some, like, lead group doctor who's like, okay, guys, here's the plan for today. Anytime you see a COVID death, even if they just have an... Like, you're not creating some plan and, like, you know, I got a secret call from Governor Carney, and he said that this is how we're going to do this, so everybody's on the same page and go. Like, it's... like...
So you've worked in plenty of different offices and buildings. Have you ever tried to get 100 people to agree on anything?
Listen.
So you figure, you have hundreds of thousands of doctors across the country have all gotten together and decided we're all going to say cause of death is
and all those assistants and nurses who got bigger mouths than anybody in the whole goddamn planet. I worked in dentistry, and listen, to your point, I remember, and this is to the whole point, all right, this conspiracy idea. I'll say that because I'm forgetting that I worked for this place and it's my friend. I'll say this. There are sometimes in places doctors who aren't great doctors. And the assistants who knew damn well that he wasn't a good doctor would go like, hell no, like, we don't play this shit. Sure. And eventually that doctor wasn't there anymore. Like, which is the point. Like, and this is one person out of a whole lot of doctors. So even if that was the case, you know, where you're like saying someone needs a filling and they don't need a filling, like, people don't miss that shit. And I feel like there are overall enough, if there was, which there isn't, some weird conspiracy, like, people can be like, no, you can't do that shit. You know what I mean? And that's the whole point, like what you just said. Like, you can't. There aren't enough people that you're working with who are just going to be like, yeah, okay, let it rock.
Well, and there's what's the incentive? Why would these doctors...
because hospitals get more money to pay to treat COVID. There's a big government incentive to come to your hospital for you to treat COVID.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see what's in it. I don't know what's in it for these doctors to pretend or inflate those numbers.
Yep.
We've got enough work on our hands. We don't need to play make-believe.
Right, and I don't even have to continue the discussion. This is a good place to kind of zero it out. So, I've stated the case as best as I can with someone who sees it all the time, who sees COVID all the time, and someone who I trust, and someone who is in it for all of the best reasons, like, wear your mask, like, one more time.
Yeah.
You can throw it at the camera, like,
sure.
Help us to get to the end of this. What do we need to do as a community to get through this, you know, next 6 months or so?
Yeah,
you think?
yeah. So number one, COVID is real. It's not a hoax. It can make you sick. It can make the people you love sick, but it doesn't have to. It really can be as simple as wearing a mask, washing your hands, social distancing, and just looking out for each other. And that you cannot survive a pandemic in isolation. You need to look out for your neighbors and your family, and they need to look out for you. And we're going to get through this. There will eventually be a vaccine, and eventually enough of us will get it that we're going to start feeling like things are back to normal. And we're going to look back years from now at this and think that was some crazy shit.
I know. Thank you, dude. Yeah, for the second time.
My pleasure.